Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hugh Laverty. I'm the Head of Scientific Operations here at IHI, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar this afternoon, where we aim to lift the lid on in-kind contributions to IHI projects. During today's webinar, we're going to explore concrete examples of different types of in-kind contributions that have been brought to our projects. And we're going to find out how these in-kind contributions have allowed the projects and our consortia to deliver things that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. And finally, we'll discover how in-kind contributions are adding value for European researchers compared to simply receiving cash from the companies that participate in our projects. To help us explore this topic, I'm very pleased to welcome representatives from 4 of our projects. We have 3 representatives coming from public partners and 2 representatives from industry partners. And they are Geert de Haan from Amsterdam, UMC, and Scott Wagers from BioSci Consulting, and they're going to speak about the IHI project Intercept. We'll then hear from Loet Overberg, who is from KU Leuven, and she is representing the IMI project Inodia. We'll be joined by Paula Curas from Medtronic, and she is representing the IHI project Grace. And finally, Jörg Blankenstein from Sanofi. He's here to discuss the IMI project 3TR. So if I could have the next slide, please. So before we start, it's just to remind you all that we will be recording this session and it's going to be published on our website. And also you will have access to the presentation slides. So you'll get all the information that we present today. We've set aside some time in the agenda for you to be able to ask us some questions and the speaker some questions. So please use the chat function on the right corner of your screen. But in the interest of time, we're going to keep the questions to the end so that we can get through the 4 interesting stories that we have for you today. So next slide, please. So just to orientate you before we get into what our experience of our projects and our consortia are, I want to spend a few moments just orientating you with what IHI is and why in-kind contributions are important for us as a program. Now, IHI is a cross-sectoral public-private partnership between the European Union and 5 different European trade associations covering the pharmaceutical, medical device, medical imaging, biotech, vaccine space. And we are a funding body, and we fund projects and consortia where we hope to create bold collaborations where public and private partners are going to come together, work on key challenges that are preventing innovation from reaching patients. And the ultimate goal is that the results of our projects will then address those challenges and hopefully transform health right across the continuum of care. Next slide, please. So we see ourselves as this neutral platform where all involved in healthcare can come together and engage in open collaboration to address these challenges. Within our projects, there's the opportunity to share risk between public and private and between different actors. We facilitate to act at scale. Now, often people think this is because we have a lot of money available. We also bring on board the in-kind contributions that you're going to hear about today, but we also mobilize a lot of skills, experience, and resource across the many different stakeholders that participate in our projects. The foundation of everything we do on all of our projects is trust. As you can imagine, in order to get patient organizations to work with large companies, whether pharma or medical device, to work with regulatory bodies, to work with university researchers, the foundation has to be a trustful working relationship. And then based upon that, This allows the researchers and the participants in our projects to get creative, to be innovative, to challenge each other, and very importantly, to learn from each other. And again, this feeds into the idea that working together, we can come up with transformative research. Next slide, please. An important element of our program, been a public-private partnership, is that we operate a matched funding model. And this is where in-kind contributions become important for us. So 50% of our funding is coming from the public side. So that's coming from the European Union, and it's made available to universities, researchers, SMEs, patients, regulatory bodies who want to participate in our projects. But very importantly, at both a program level and at a project level, 50% of the total project costs have to come from industry members in the form of in-kind contributions. So next slide, please. And there are different types of in-kind contributions, and you're going to hear about them from the projects today. But it's in-kind is an essential part of our program. And when I'm asked to explain what an in-kind is, I usually refer to in-kind for operational activities, and I apologize for the jargon. But ICOP, as we call it, this is basically the eligible costs for an industry or a company to participate in one of our projects. So it's the actual cost of their activities in a project. And these are defined before a project starts. They're subject to audit, and like the companies and the industry partners, they are embedded into our projects because the companies participate in our projects and they sign the grant agreement. So they are bound by the same rights and obligations as the public partners. A second thing to remember about the ICOP that companies bring is that it is bound by the same eligibility criteria and the same calculation methods that we apply to the use of public funding. So the same rules apply to both public and private partners and to the money they're receiving and the contributions that they bring in. I'm sure you will all be very pleased to know that that's the last of my technical discussion of in-kind contribution. But if you're interested, we have a very detailed financial webinar, and you can actually find that webinar by clicking through on the IHI financial webinar on the slide. So next slide, please. And then just to set the scene a little bit, you're going to hear the specific examples that our projects and our consortia are bringing to the discussion today. But just to give you a flavor of what in-kind contributions are, they can be a wide range of activities that the companies actually bring into the projects, whether that is their innovation platforms, the work they're doing on target validation, the infrastructures that they've got around clinical trials, registries, and biobanks. They can bring their tools and methodologies related to drug development or the way they do clinical trials. They can bring clinical studies. They bring a lot of data and the work they do with the standardization and sharing of that data. And very importantly, they bring their expertise. They actually bring people and researchers from the industry side into our projects, which is a vital resource. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. So next slide, please. So that concludes my little introductory remarks. Hopefully it's given you a little reminder of what IHI is, what we're trying to do, and why in-kind is important for us. But now it's very important that we move to the projects to find out what the actual experience is. And if we go to the next slide. So I'm going to hand the floor over to Geert and to Scott, and they're going to tell us about their experience of the Intercept project.
Thank you, Scott, for this kind introduction. And I cannot agree more that IHI projects are really a lot of fun. I mean, this is probably the largest project I've ever initiated in my 30-year-long career, but it's intellectually been one of the most rewarding, exactly because you collaborate with people that you don't daily collaborate with in industry, but also patient societies and whatnot. The next slide. Today, I'm joined by Scott Wagers, and Scott was instrumental in helping us set up this very complicated project that I will tell you briefly about. It's about ending a disease on which I have been working for 30 years, which is Crohn's disease. And we were triggered by similar experiences in type 1 diabetes and rheumatoid arthritis, where preclinical disease markers predicted that an individual would develop the disease, for us Crohn's disease, up to 7 years before the diagnosis. And so we wanted to do an initiative where we identify those individuals and perhaps prevent the occurrence, the diagnosis of the disease before it becomes clinical. Next slide. So yeah, this is the launch meeting. The problem is huge with inflammatory bowel disease. It's reaching almost 1% of the total population in Western countries now, and it's rapidly rising in Asia and in other newly industrialized countries. So the health benefits of taking care of those diseases are very relevant, because people affected by these diseases are usually young professionals in the most active periods of their life. Next slide. So what we wanted to do, there were already some initiatives that looked at preclinical biomarkers, mostly in North America. I mean, knew those people quite well. They did the discovery over the last 20 years already, but that had never been validated in European populations, which is exactly which is the main pillar of our project. And we will take that further then if we identify people at the greatest risk. Again, these are not patients, these are people, and we use first-degree relatives because they have an 8 times increased risk of getting Crohn's disease when one of the parents has Crohn's disease. And we can take those people with the highest risk forward into a prospective clinical trial, which I will tell you about. Next slide. So this is the flow of Intercept. To the left, you see the biomarkers that have individually been identified, mostly in North America. Most of you know the Nurses' Health Study, for instance, in Boston, and the GEM study. And so we're applying all those markers in existing cohorts in Europe that we have in biobanks, not in industry. It's mostly academic, where certain universities have collected biobank material of relatives to, in this case, people with Crohn's disease. And we have 500 such samples that we will analyze together with 500 control samples. And where we know that those individuals develop Crohn's disease later on, those will be analyzed in a big data hub, which we base in Groningen, and will be converted into a predictive algorithm for the development of Crohn's disease. Next slide. The following step is again validate. So these are the European cohorts that I told you about, is the biobanked materials. But let me tell you, it's been a big headache to bring all that biobank material in 5 or 6 European countries to one site in, first of all, in Amsterdam, and then in Groningen, because all those material transfer agreements and data transfer agreements had to be arranged one-to-one between those universities, and that was not taken care of in the consortium agreement. Next slide is the biggest chunk of the work, is the screening of 10,000 first-degree relatives, which is currently ongoing. So all our Crohn's patients, we're asking, do you have brothers, sisters, do you have children in the age range of 16 to 35, and we ask them to participate and to give us a serum sample and then enter their health data in an app that we follow prospectively for the whole duration of the project. And many outcomes are being analyzed. Next slide shows you then, okay, one back, sorry, I think I missed one. The last bit of the trial is a bit the crown on the work, is the interventional trial, where we will identify 140 individuals that really have the highest risk of developing Crohn's disease. Those will be invited to a controlled trial with vedolizumab, a very safe drug for Crohn's disease, versus placebo for the duration of 2 years. And that is the first interception trial in this disease in an attempt to really prevent or at least delay the diagnosis of Crohn's disease. The next slide shows you then the in-kind contribution that we collected when we designed this project now 3 years ago or so. So our biggest partner was Takeda. We invited many more big pharma companies. None of them were really interested, but Takeda is really a GI company, and they have a drug that only works in the gut for inflammatory bowel disease. And so they had some clinical trials that were ongoing and were in the planning phase. And we also did a number of sponsored by Takeda IISs in Amsterdam and in countries around us, where there was material that could be used for analysis. So besides samples and data, there is a high input of FTEs for biostatistics. We also brought another company in based in San Diego, Prometheus Biosciences. They can measure antibacterial antibodies in those patients and individuals, because that is a chunk of the markers we measure. There we had an issue that the company was based in San Diego, and that is not European based. And then Lutker is a company close to Oxford that is specialized in glycome analysis. And because we think that the glycome, so the glycosylated immunoglobulins, are also predictive marker for developing Crohn's disease. Next slide. And I won't make it too long, but so there were 4 clinical trials that Takeda was either sponsoring or running themselves. The next slide shows you the trials that we were doing already in Amsterdam. They were kind of halfway. Reprevio was a trial where we used vedolizumab to prevent post-operative recurrence of Crohn's disease. So it's kind of the same disease that comes back after surgery in a placebo-controlled trial. And we had another trial, the LOVE-CD trial in Netherlands and Belgium, 250 individuals where the same drug again was used in people with very early diagnosis of Crohn's disease and late diagnosis. And of all those individuals in trial 1 and 2, we had serum sampled serially that we had easily access to because they were in the biobank in Amsterdam. Next slide. So these are the trials that basically we collected, and you see the research question there. And actually, the samples are being analyzed with exactly the same work stream as we are doing in the European validation court on the biobank material of individuals that later develop Crohn's disease. We just want to know if the same signals can be identified in these patients who have a diagnosis. The next slide are the trials that were planned at the time by Takeda. Vectors is a trial where they serially treat patients with vedolizumab and follow them with ultrasound. And Victriva is a trial where they combine vedolizumab with another agent, a JAK inhibitor, upadacitinib, again looking at endpoints and endoscopic improvement. So these are patients that have established disease. And here we want to find out if in the serum of those patients, those preclinical biomarkers are still present, have they changed, or are they changing during the treatment? Something that we don't know yet, and that those trials are recruiting, so those materials are not yet available, but they will be available in the year or 1 or 2 years to come. Next slide. So then our CROWN trial, how I call it, is a placebo-controlled trial with vedolizumab versus placebo. We're using subcutaneous vedolizumab, and there was no placebo available at the company because they never did a true subcutaneous placebo-controlled trial. So Takeda is generating a subcutaneous vedolizumab placebo for our trial. 70 patients will receive placebo injections every other week for 2 years, right? And that is an enormous cost. It is more than $1.5 million to generate the placebo injections that look identical to vedolizumab injections. And evidently, it's a double-blind trial. Next slide. I'm almost coming to the end here. So here I'm again listing the samples, mostly the samples. vectors, Victriva, the halt setting the cost of the medication, and the placebo manufacturing, and then of course the FTEs. Because the three partners, and now we can go to the next slide, the three partners that we have on board have invested a lot of manpower, so to speak, not only to design the trial, also to design their own trials, but so collectively among Lutke, Prometheus, and Takeda, we have 268 personnel months that are brought into the in-kind. And so they're strongly involved. We have a meeting every other week with all the relevant partners, and the partners are virtually always present, although they are sometimes based in other parts of the world, and the meeting times shift all over the 24-hour clock. Next slide, I think, is the last one, and then we're open to questions, I think. So this was a challenging process to identify the value of those samples. All those samples in those trials, how do you dedicate a value to that? Because you need a very large trial infrastructure in order to be able to collect those samples, to store them, to ship them, and whatnot. And some of those trials are international. That was also an issue. The Vectors and Victriva are global trials. Now, in-kind is supposed to be money that is spent in Europe, right? And so there we have the very difficult calculation of what proportion of those trials can be brought into our project. And another issue, I already mentioned that for Prometheus, that some partners have their headquarters in the United States. They usually have departments in Europe, but in a global world with global pharma presence, I found that personally a very difficult exercise to determine the value of their work and what can count for the IHI. We've had that discussion. So maybe that's something to think about for the future. And I think, do I have one more slide? I don't think so. So I don't know if we do questions now or later. Thank you for your kind attention.
Well, thanks very much, Geert, for a very interesting presentation and for sticking to time. Just in the interest of time, we're going to take questions at the end. But I can already see there's a question for you related to your US entity. So we'll come back to that point you made at the end. So thanks once again. And we'll move on now to our second project. Well, actually our second and third projects from Lut. So if you wouldn't, if you're available to take the floor.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you from IHI to invite me here to share some experiences from Inodia and Identify. Next slide, please. Maybe first some facts and figures. So we started with the Inodia project in 2015 under IMI2. It was the first call in IMI2. It was a project of 8 years with in total more than 41 million costs, of which more than 12 million in-kind contribution from FPA partners. And the project is focusing on or around translational approaches to disease-modifying therapy of type 1 diabetes. Next slide, please. And then in 2019, we received extra funding for a new project that was again under IMI, which we obtained through a restricted call and which was from the same consortium and building further on Inodia, but with novel aims. This is a 3-year project with 12 million total costs, of which 2.7 FPA in-kind contributions. And as I said, this is harvesting actually the fruits of Inodia that we had achieved by that time. Next slide, please. These are all our consortium partners of Inodia, both Inodia and Inodia Harvest. So we had, I have to look now, 31 academic partners, academic or clinical hospitals. We have 2 foundations, patient organizations from the US, and we have 5 large FPIA companies and 1 small SME. Next slide, please. And these are our objectives in Inodia, very briefly explained. So the idea here was to, in a first work package, collect or recruit a whole cohort of newly diagnosed type 1D patients, and also unaffected first-degree relatives who are at risk of developing the disease in a longitudinal way, meaning that we took samples of all these participants during 2 or 4 years in order to do biomarker analysis and to be able to find novel biomarkers for better prediction of the disease development. Also very important in this project was that the clinical sites were accredited for performing trials. And in Inodia, we performed 1 clinical trial. Then in Inodia Harvest, we did another, we run another 3 clinical trials. And also in Inodia Harvest, we expanded the let's say, biomarker analysis towards novel technologies like microbiome analysis and novel CGM devices, so continuous glucose monitoring. Next slide, please. And then I took the liberty actually to also include here Identify, which is a new project that we started in 2023. It's a 5-year project with more than 20 million total funding, of which 5 million FPIA or industry contribution, in-kind contribution. And this project is focusing around diagnosis of early non-clinical type 1 diabetes in the general population in Europe. Next slide, please. And here you see the project partners in Identify, which are mainly 50% similar as in Inodia, but a lot of new partners were included with specific expertise in screening methods. So here we have 18 academic and clinical sites or institutes, and we managed to include 2 FPIA large companies, Novo Nordisk and Sanofi, and 1 medtech company, Medtronic. And again, we have the 2 foundations, patient organizations of the United States. Next slide, please. And here I will briefly show you the goals or objectives of Identify. So it's a project that is focusing around setting up screening programs for early stage, which is a non-clinical stage of the disease in different countries in Europe, so in children, where we screen them for the presence of autoantibodies. And once they have antibodies in their blood, it means that they will actually, in the course of their life, develop type 1 diabetes. So we call it now an early stage of the disease. We aim to screen 200,000 children, and I'm very proud to say that as of today, we reached the number of 100,000, so we're halfway the screening numbers. What we further do is once children are identified as really having autoantibodies and being in an early stage, we monitor for progression towards clinical disease and do further biomarker analysis to refine and try to predict if some children will develop faster or slower towards clinical disease. Also, important in the project is to evaluate the impact of screening, where I mean looking at psychological impact, economical feasibility of screening in different European countries, ethical considerations, and those things. And finally, very important in this project is also the communication and implementation, because we're also aiming to implement screening not only in the Identify countries, but even beyond these countries in the whole of Europe. Next slide, please. Now, why do we think that the public-private partnership is like really the way to go for these projects. We really think that having the academic institutes, the university hospitals on the one hand, and industry partners on the other hand, in a collaborative project as equal partners, being really essential to reach to transform the results into actions. And we really think that this is a unique opportunity to tackle type 1 diabetes as we go here from basic research to clinical trials and prevention of type 1D, hoping in the end to come towards a world without type 1 diabetes. Next slide, please. And so I will try to explain this to you, what the role of these companies is in terms of in-kind contributions through 4 areas that were of interest to us in both Inodia and Identify. Next slide, please. The first area is the drug development tools, where, as I said already, we looked at biomarker analysis and new technologies. In Inodia mainly, we looked in the rich sample collection from the newly diagnosed patients and first degree relatives through advanced omics analysis, where we looked through different omics. Some of those experiments were done in academic institutes, but also in the research labs of the pharmaceutical companies. Important omics experiments were performed, such as lipidomics, metabolomics, transcriptomics. And this led, for instance, to one paper, but many others after that. That was a real collaboration between public and private partnerships. And then another example here is on a new technology, continuous glucose monitoring device that is provided in Identify to all participants diagnosed in early stage type 1D as an in-kind contribution. Until now, this is already the largest cohort of children that have this CGM, and we hope to have data soon to analyze this interesting cohort for novel biomarkers. Second area where we have important in-kind contributions is clinical trial design and regulatory advice. Here, I think it's maybe evident that the expertise of companies is much higher and at a much higher level than what we have in our academic institutes. And here I'm talking, for instance, on protocol design, regulatory aspects, also health economic modeling to evaluate the feasibility of, for instance, screening in general population in different countries, which can be different based on the different health systems. And based on this expertise and collaborations we had with the companies and many meetings and discussions we had, we made in Inodia a master protocol for newly diagnosed type 1 diabetes. This was published, and we also received qualitative advice from EMA on this. And now we are doing the same in Identify for early stage type 1D. Next slide, please. And then the third area that I want to mention here is the communication and dissemination of our project results, so-called branding, which I can tell you is much, much easier with the help of the industry partners that spend a lot of effort, much more, I think, even than their official in-kind contributions. Just some examples here are the website design that is taken by them, organization of annual meetings. So every two meetings is organized by an FPA partner and the other meetings by academic partners. So we switch here. But also large events at international conferences are organized by industry partners. Other examples, developments of videos, podcasts, whatever you can think of, development of communication material for people or countries that are interested in screening but are not part of the consortium. So all these interesting and important aspects really helped branding both of Inodia, which is now to be seen as the biggest organization in Europe for making a platform of clinical trials and also for identifying. And then the next slide, please. I come to my last slide, that is, I would call it capacity building, where I would say that having, we had in both our projects, we have Sanofi as a co-lead, where we closely interact for project management. And I have to say it is a much more professional way in which we can manage this project. Just some examples. Legal expertise from Sanofi in, for instance, guiding on consortium agreement during the grant agreement phase, making CDAs, making charters, all those legal things. Also, co-development of management methods, they helped a lot. They have methods in place for following up of the progress project, progress, risk assessment, data management, and other important management tools. And finally, they also helped substantially in developing a sustainability plan in Inodia, where we now, after the end of the project, created or managed to create a non-profit organization. And this Inodia non-profit organization is now the platform for clinical trials in Europe. And this is where I would like to end.
That's great. Thanks very much, Lut. I can see lots of questions coming in, so I'm sure we'll be hearing from you at the end during the Q&A session. But thanks for telling us about all of the really exciting work that's going on with Inodia, Inodia Harvest, and Identify. So I think we can move on to our next presentation, which is from Paula, and you're going to tell us, but give us the industry perspective on your experience in the project GRACE.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I am Paula Curras from Medtronic Ibérica. I am Innovation Project Manager. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about GRACE, introducing a little bit about the project, and more importantly, to illustrate how the in-kind contribution is making possible to achieve the results that we think that it will not be possible otherwise. So if you can go to the next slide, please. As we know, cardiovascular diseases is one of the key leading causes of death in Europe. So therefore, the ambition of GRACE is to drive the new era of cardiovascular disease. Our project is built as a public-private partnership, bringing together more than 27 partners from 11 different countries, bringing together hospitals, universities, research institutes, and some of the key leading industry companies of the sector. We think that this diversity is essential because transforming cardiovascular care requires collaboration across the entire healthcare ecosystem, from clinical research to technology development to be able to implement it in real healthcare systems. So if you can go to the next slide, please. The GRACE project started just 1 year ago on February 2025, and it's going to last 4.5 years. It's, I think, that really interesting in the context of today's webinar to see a little bit about how the funding of the project is composed. As we can see, alongside with the EU contribution, there is a significant share of in-kind from the different industry associations that they are participated, from MedTech Europe, EFPIA, and COCIR, alongside with the contribution from the European Commission, which on the total, it brings up to more than 19 million euros to fund the activities of this project. If we go to the next slide, just to let you know a little bit more in depth about the GRACE project, We know that cardiovascular care is often fragmented, so patients have to move from one specialist to another, and we not always work in an integrated pathway system. So therefore, GRACE aims to address this challenge by combining both cutting-edge technologies with new models of care. We don't want to do like individual interventions, but to rethink the entire of the patient journey, bringing together from diagnosis until treatment and long-term follow-up. If we jump to the next slide, we can see which are the 6 clinical interventions that we are tackling along the project. First of all, going through the transforming the atrial fibrillation management to improve the coordination in cardiac oncology, redefining cardiac surgery recovery, advancing cardiac MRI for INOCA diagnosis, optimizing the heart failure management, and finally, building a holistic pathway for cardiovascular disease. But to be able to perform all of these, we need a really diverse consortium that in the next slide, we can see a little bit how the consortium spans across all Europe, as we said, bringing together hospital, academic institutions, and industry partners. But there is also here something that we would like to highlight, because we not only count with a contribution from the industry from Europe, but only we count with organizations from outside, more precisely in this case from South Korea, that they are also providing their in-kind contribution to performing the project. Here, we would like, as we said, just to highlight that IHI provides the framework for these companies to participate, but it's only, we have to say that it's capped up to 20% of the total in-kind of the project, the amounts that they can bring. This, we think that it's something to highlight, because there are many companies that they have other affiliates in the US or Asia, but that they can also contribute in the project when they have a relevant expertise. So if we jump to the next slide, we can see like the 3 key areas that we have in GRACE related to the in-kind contributions that industry are bringing. First of all, the digital technologies, including platforms and remote monitoring solutions, then AI and decision support systems to advancing the analytics of the risk prediction, and the third one also bringing industry FTEs with their know-how in healthcare processes and change management. If we jump to the next slide, we can deep dive a little bit more in one of the first parts that, as we said, is the digital health technologies, which all of these in-kind contributions include from remote patient monitoring tools, digital health platforms, and systems for integrating the patient data. Here, it strongly reflects in the impact of the GRACE project by making clinicians be able to access more complete and continuous information about the patient. And also, this is a clear example that all these in-kind contributions bring industrial technologies that they have already been tested, but not starting from scratch. If we go to the next one, we can see the second part, that is the artificial intelligence and decision support systems. Here, we are bringing advanced data analytics, AI algorithms, and clinical decision support systems in order to be able to develop a new capability for expertise and infrastructure that are typically developed under industrial environments. But this allows the companies to be able to test all of these solutions directly in the clinical context in real environments. If we jump to the last example of the in-kind contributions that, as we said, is more related with the knowledge from the FTEs working in the industries, we think that bringing this internal expertise is crucial to be able to make sure that all of these tools, they are at the end implemented in the real environments. As we said, this includes knowledge from hospital workflows, experience in designing integrated care pathways, and practical strategies to support the implementation of the innovation. As a result, we think that this is like the perfect fit to make sure that we can include in the real practice to be able of the clinicians to adopt these solutions in the real care settings. And finally, if we move to the last slide, there are just some key takeaways from the project, where we think that these in-kind contributions can make a really big difference in the access to industrial technologies, to integrate these technologies in the real healthcare systems, and also to build this strong public-private collaboration that we think is crucial to make sure that innovation takes place. And finally, if we jump, I think that was my last slide. So thank you very much and happy to gather your questions at the end.
Thank you, Paula. It's very interesting to see, because GRACE is one of our newer projects as well, to see the interesting program that you've got planned. And as we said, we'll come back to address some questions to you at the end. So now I think we can move to Jörg, and you're going to tell us about your experience from the project 3TR.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Jörg Blankenstein. I'm a public-private partnership manager at Sanofi, and I have the pleasure to talk about other people's work mainly, because what I show you today is not what I did, but the community of the project did. So 3TR is a project that tackles or tries to tackle the question of why people do not respond to treatment, to put it very short and precise. There are 7 diseases that are looked at in 3TR. They're all immune-mediated. There's in respiratory, in gastroenterology, and in rheumatology. And it's a big project. The coordinator is Marta Alarcón-Riquelme, and Sanofi has the honor to be the industry co-lead. It's a project that is run in 15 countries. It's scheduled in the beginning to be for 7 years. We probably will have to ask for a bit more because we're not yet there where we want to be. And it's an overall project budget of 80 million, which is split half and half between industry in kind and EU. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you a flavor of the size. We have 58 public entities, universities, or patient organizations. I think there are about 50 clinical sites actively recruiting patients. We have 12 private FPM members, and this makes quite a crowd. Next slide, please. So what are we actually doing? So as I said, we're looking at responders and non-responders in immune-mediated diseases. The scope and the aim is to improve the personalized treatment by identification, validation of predictive biomarkers, pathways, and whatever could help to get the right treatment to the right patient. The overall setup is a bit in a matrix way. You have the different diseases that have their specialties around them, and then you have an overarching structure of the consortium helping it. This all together will leverage, and is leveraging for the last couple of years, a lot of legacy data, of retrospective data, but we're also running a prospective. We're also in not one, but we're running 7 prospective clinical trials with up to 3,000 patients that are enrolled. Next slide, please. So to get this big machine running, there's an overall theme that is that we are hypothesis and data driven. So as I said, it's in 6 pillars, considering on the diseases. And on the one side, there is data generation, and this data generation is standardized and it's centralized so that the data that is generated is entirely comparable between diseases and between different arms of the clinical trials. So there's a lot of logistics and governance ongoing. And there's a lot of discussion on the disease level. But obviously, if you put 7 diseases together, you also want to have some sort of cross-disease overview. And this is what the super tick on the right side shows you. We have diseases looking at their data and then reporting back into a cross-disease area where people then try to find out what's the best way to leverage synergies and to inspire each other with ideas. People involved are clinicians, mode of action researchers, bioinformatics. There's hypothesis generation and verification. there's a lot around clinical definitions, because when I tell you that we're looking at responders and non-responders, the first thing you need to do is define them. What is a responder? And if you look in different areas, you will have very various definitions of how a responder is. Probably every clinical trial has its own definition of a responder. So one of the things also to harmonize this and have a common understanding. What is it with a responder, non-responder? And obviously we're looking at biomarkers and patient-reported outcomes, all these things that can come and help us to improve the patient treatment. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you everything about the different things that happen within 3TR. We thought together with my colleagues that it would be interesting just to show you one special topic where a lot of FTE, where a lot of in-kind contribution are in there, and to show you how this can come up to a really beautiful synergetic way. So I hope I'll convince you with my slides. We're coming on slide. Next slide, please. So the idea came from industry. Stefan Schreiber in Kiel. He had this idea about disease control and disease trajectories, trying to understand at which stage you can separate different patient populations between responders and non-responders, always looking at how to get disease control, patients that will stay healthy for a long time. This is important for patients because obviously you want to know whether a treatment will work for you, but it's also important for drug development to have the right patient for the right therapy. So it's really about personalized medicine. One of the things that he did is looking at the baseline characteristics. What would you need to define responders and non-responders, and then see over time what happens. And as you can see with a purple curve, the super R curve on the bottom, these are people that respond quickly and well and sustainable to treatment. That's what they call the super responders. And then unfortunately on the top, you have the black bar. That's the non-responders, the super non-responders. So whatever they get, they don't really improve. And in between, you have two curves that cross each other, which is the in-between lines where well, like always, it's not always black and white. There's a bit of gray space. Some people go up, some people go down, but it's distinct lines. So as I said before, in 3TR, there are working groups on each disease. And the work package 7 working group, the data interpretation group, this was lengthy discussed. And the question was, how can we validate this out of one trial into a bigger setting? Is there any way we could do it? And if you go to the next slide. So there's, as you can see on the second column, there's quite a few companies involved. And these companies, as we all know and knew then, is they run clinical trials, but they are proprietary sensitive data trials, things that you don't just put out into the open. So the question was, we have these trials, how can we use them in a way to validate the hypothesis without divulging all the secrets that companies already always have around these topics. So if you go to the next slide, and this is the work of our colleagues from Takeda. We're not going to go through this very busy slide. It was to set up a framework, which we call now the federated meta-analysis framework, where you think together as a community about the way you want to analyze the data, the way you want to structure it, which are the right endpoints, how to structure the analysis plan. And then you're going to execute this plan, each and every one with a single data set. You still keep the full control of your data set, you keep the full control about what's going out, and then when everybody's happy, you share it with the community, but only the results. And this is the way where you can easily share confidential data in a federated way and saying, look, if I take your analysis plan on my data, I get this output. If you go to the next slide, we can see the results. And here you can see when on these different clinical trials in different settings, in different companies, the same plan has been applied, you come up with very similar curves. So independent of the mode of action, the same patient-reported outcomes can separate the different patients into different patient trajectories. And this is really something that is really interesting for the terms of, as you can see, you can very early on see where someone goes, whether you don't have to wait for weeks and weeks. So this is a potential for prediction of how you can get there. So on the next slide. So this has been presented by Stefan Schreiber and the industry colleagues at the ECHO in 2025. Since then, what have we done? What has been done? Well, first of all, this has been translated and discussed cross disease. It needs to be adapted because the patient-reported outcome in IBD in gastroenterology are not the same as they will be in asthma. Obviously, there are differences there, so this needs to be adapted. The other thing that needs to be done is to get the finalization of the ongoing prospective observational trials for the 3,000 patients that run within 3TR to make sure that we get this standardized and high quality data out of it. And since the results were so interesting and so promising, we also said, well, look, we probably need another level of understanding. So industry pooled together some cash and said, we want to run another level of analytics. And we paid for proteomic analysis on the same samples. Next slide, please. So to sum up, I hope I could show you that pulling together industry and academia, you can, industry and academia expertise and execution, you can generate a huge in-kind contribution in terms of what's going on, but moreover on impact. We can help with data sets for hypothesis generation and validation. And we have this federated analysis framework that helps us to use even sensitive data. And then when needed, well, if you need some more analytics to be sure what you want to do, you can always put some cash on the table and say, I want to see some more. So the close collaboration of industry and academic scientists is really crucial to bring projects forwards in a much faster way. It's a co-constructed scientific roadmap, so it's not one deciding what the others have to do. It's about sharing knowledge and data, and it's about generation of high impact, pretty competitive results. And I think that was it for me.
So thank you, Jörg. That really, you covered a lot of ground in very quick time, and I have to thank all of the speakers. You were super well behaved because we finished well ahead of time, and so I suppose that's a symbol of public-private partnership working in perfect harmony, because we've gained 10 minutes for the Q&A session, which we have lots of questions, and I propose that we actually move to that. Just one comment from my side. Looking at the questions that we are receiving, several of them seem quite technical and general in nature. So I would propose that I prioritize the more general ones that most of you can answer, and the specific questions based upon the examples that our speakers have given. And then if at the end I have time to go through some of these more technical questions, I'll try my best to answer them. But please remember, as I said at the beginning, we have this webinar on the financial rules and procedures, where we have a section dedicated to how to manage in-kind contributions. And that's available on our website related with Caldwell. But we'll do our best to get through as much as we can. So I'll start with some of the, well, just go through the specific questions and then come on to some of the more general. So Geert, if I can turn to you. We received a question when you were speaking about the challenge that Prometheus, the company in the US that you mentioned, and it was bringing non-EU. And the question was, could you explain that challenge exactly and how you overcame it within the project?
Thank you for the question. We only partly overcame it. This is a company run by a few French guys, but based in San Diego. So it is a pure US based companies. And the idea was to send European samples there of the first degree relatives, have them analyzed and get the results back to us. Now their in-kind contribution was reasonable because it's less than 20%. And as you know, there can be 20% non-US in-kind. So that was okay. The major challenge with Prometheus was sending samples from certain countries, mainly from Scandinavian countries outside of EU, which we haven't managed. So what we had to do is to bring their assay to our labs, which again brought another level of complexity because there's IP, of course, with their assay. Scott, do you want to join and you have additional thoughts on that?
No, I mean, not much more to add to that except for the very fact that, working across international like this, it can be really challenging, and the 20% rule puts another wrinkle on all that. But I think it's really creativity and the willingness of Prometheus to work with a consortium that really has helped. Not much more to say except that it is a challenge, because then where does their in-kind go? Because is that now mostly just transferring the samples, which isn't going to be that much in kind. And these are the things you have to balance with. I think fortunately Intercept has a lot of extra in kind that can help to mitigate the fact that some of the in kind won't materialize.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay.
I think that's the key. Yeah.
And so I've got another question for you both. And so this is coming from one of the attendees. If I understand the first project case well, it would be good to go a bit deeper in explaining how parallel clinical trials outside of the project can be seen as in-kind contribution and how it was valued.
There are a number of levels. There are questions that, for instance, we want to answer in the preclinical samples that we don't know how the biomarkers behave in people that have the disease. So that is evidently a question that we need to address. Also, how it behaves when you treat the disease. Do the biomarkers go away? Those are things that are very relevant research questions. Sometimes during a clinical trial, there's also a certain device validated or an assay validated that wouldn't be there without the clinical trial. For instance, if ultrasound, now to speak about our world of bowel disease, if ultrasound is implemented in a certain clinical trial for a drug registration, and we implement that in our preclinical patients, for instance, with the same measures, well, that could be an in-kind contribution. To my sense, I don't know how Scott thinks about that, but something that is developed by the company in another setting that is then used in an IHI project. That's how I see it. But we didn't use this example, but just one of my thoughts.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I mean, the whole thing was just sort of in a co-design kind of way, asking what do you have going on that could be useful for this project as well, right? And I think that was really the insightful, because even just checking the biomarker, even if it's a different clinical trial, how it responds in that setting is really relevant, even though we're looking at a different patient population to start. And I think that is the key. And there was also key because, as the last speaker, as Jörg pointed out, it's often difficult to get access to clinical trials. In this case, they were really willing to do it because they were investigator-led studies. And it's really late in the course of the drug that's being studied in the most cases. So they're very willing to share that kind of data. So it depends on the type of trial and data you have as well. It's important to think about in terms of the sharing, because obviously something you're bringing into a phase 2 study and it's going for registration, that's very sensitive proprietary data. Something that's already on the market for a while, that data is something the company probably wants to be out there and shared and used, right? And so that's also the wrinkle we have in here that makes it feasible and possible.
Yeah, these are phase 4 trials, and that's a different animal than registration trials, evidently.
Yeah. So thanks for
the post-marketing trials,
yeah. So maybe just in the interest of time, we can move to a question for you, Lut. Again, the attendee is asking for a stage 1 application. do I understand that you prepare the clinical trial design with the private sector? Don't you have to have the proposal in advance to convince them to join? So I think here maybe you could talk about you have Inodia, which was 2-stage.
Yes,
Identify, if I remember correctly, was a single stage.
yes, indeed.
So maybe you could explain a little bit how
Well, this
studies.
is a bit of a complicated question, I think. So indeed, Inodia was a two-stage call where we did not, I mean, Inodia and Inodia Harvest together, we had 4 clinical trials run. At the start or at the writing process, we did not have the full design for the clinical trial. But I think that the companies were convinced just by even joining the consortium without having even a compound, an IMP compound in place, but hoping that during the course of the project, they would have an IMP that they could then implement. And then at that time, make a protocol and increase they increase their in-kind contribution and increase their financial contribution to be able to execute the trial still in Inodia and in Inodia Harvest. So I'm not sure if this answers my question. So, but they were convinced that with the consortium that we were building, it might work out.
And I mean, I think the other thing that doesn't come across because we've been quite stingy with the time, so made you explain very complicated projects in only a few minutes. Often the projects are multi-step, so there are a lot of activities that go into preparing, and some projects make it to a clinical study, and other projects don't make it to a clinical study, but for many different reasons. So the context can be quite different as well. I've now got a general question for everybody, and it's a really interesting question. And I'm going to direct it first of all to you, Jörg, because you've probably got a lot of experience from the industry side. So the question is, may I ask how your organization managed changes in the reported in-kind contributions during project implementation, particularly shifts in internal cost structures such as daily personnel rates, when these differ from the proposal stage? I am interested in how you ensure planning reliability given the potential impact on the originally planned person months in the work packages. So maybe it would be good to start with you, Jörg and Paula, to get the industry perspective, because your industries are subject to quite a lot of change. And then maybe it'd be nice to hear from the public side how that actually impacts your planning and your work.
Okay, I'll try to give it a very quick answer. The one is agility. So because whatever you plan, and you know, people who are in IMI, IHI projects know, from the moment you start to think about it, the moment you write the application, the moment this goes into a grant agreement, and then you execute it, there are years in there. So what you do is a bet, and you try to make a good bet, the best bet possible. And then you have to be agile to adapt to reality in terms of, we had to adapt to COVID. No one ever thought about a global pandemic for 2 years. So you just adapt to the situation that it comes, and you try to shift things. And one of the things that is very important in our industry, focus of company changes. So this is probably the most difficult part for us. How do we keep a company? If I take 3TR, started in 2018, how do you keep a company engaged for that long on the same topic? So you make a bet that this will be a topic that is still relevant to your company in 5 years' time, in 6 years, 7 years' time. And with a bit of luck, you come up with much more in-kind contribution than you thought. That's the positive pace. And this is why we take let's say, a conservative approach on in-kind. We're not going to think that we're going to have millions and millions that come in. We try to be as conservative as we can and to match what we really think is realistic. And if reality is much rosier than this, well, we have more in-kind contribution. That's the way it is. But we try to avoid not coming up with what we promised. Does that answer the question somehow?
I think so. Well, I mean, I think, Paula, maybe you can bring another perspective from the industry side.
Yes, indeed. And also thank you very much for the question, because indeed, as Jörg was just mentioning, these are quite long projects. So to commit since the proposal phase, because sometimes you submit the proposal, then it takes almost nearly 1 year to start officially the project, and then there are lengthy projects of around 5 years. So indeed, from an industry perspective, we think that we are also targeting projects that we think that they are also strategic to the company's interest, also bringing this collaboration together, and also to making sure that they are projects that they are going to have a really high evidence generation from an innovation perspectives, and also trying to bring a lot of let's say knowledge within the company about it, what is being done, because sometimes this is also attracts other people from within the company to actually join also the project, bringing also in-kind contribution, thinking about the great evidence that this can generate throughout the company.
Great. And maybe we could move over to Gert and to Lut. In your experience of the changes that occur within the companies and how you absorb that as a consortium.
Yeah. I think Scott already gave a hint of how we handled it. I think we had a much more in-kind contributions than we needed for the proposal, so we can handle some reduction due to well, whatever unexpected events. But Scott, maybe you have other tricks that you have used in your large experience.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, because I was involved in some of the very first IMI projects, and the thing that I think that works is actually not to look at a project as this is a set of goals and tasks and things you're going to do for the whole time, but to take opportunities. For example, in the UBIPID project, we had industry partners come and go, but then we had this opportunity. Well, there's all these samples, and suddenly they were very interested in characterizing it. So one of the companies contributed in the end 139% of their plant in kind, because they took the opportunity to see, well, this would be great for us. So I think it's a matter of having an open mindset when you do these, because as Jörg pointed out, this is a 5-year project. No one knows what's going to happen 5 years down the road. So you need to be really adaptive, and you need to, when those little opportunities come up in your discussions, to pursue them to some degree. I always say at least try to do a little pilot project to get it going, and then you find out, oh, well, this could be something much bigger, interesting to everybody. You pursue that. And that's where, to be honest, where most of the best outcomes come from. I think 3TR probably has a lot of that kind of experience as well, from what I know of how it developed. So
Thanks, Scott. And maybe Lut, from your perspective?
Yes, maybe what I can add, it's indeed a very good question, and not always easy to manage. But from the side of the academics, we see it more like all the in-kind contributions together, not per company. And indeed, we see, as long as this stays at 50%, or in IHI at 45%, we're good. And as long as, of course, we can mitigate if there are some changes, and we can maintain our objectives and deliverables, we're fine. We had some big, issues. We had, for instance, one SME that got bankrupt. So that was not, to say, easy to overcome. But we also had then other companies that were happy to increase their in-kind contribution, or were already increasing it by itself, and took over some of the tasks of this company. So in the end, it really worked out. As I say, some companies had lower in-kind contributions than promised, but others had way higher. And in the end, we ended up with more in-kind than we had initially foreseen. So we had actually no problems. But I can understand that from the view of a single industry perspective, it might be challenging, or look challenging, but I think you need to see it as a whole consortium. And it is, of course, a long period, and things happen and things change, and you need to mitigate and see how to make it work.
Yes, I think if you want to be a coordinator of an IMI or IHI project, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty, be able to adapt. So, so thanks for your answers there. I've got a specific question for Paula from Grace, and it is, I think on your slides you mentioned digital platforms and AI technologies as in kind. And the question is, how do you value these, or how do you put a cost on these?
Great, thank you. Thank you for the question. Indeed, usually the way we try to make the valorization of this is typical with the personal cost of the work needed to configure, deploy, and integrate those solutions in the project. So let's say with the work of the software engineers, data scientists, or clinical experts that they are working in these algorithms. And so we focus more in that effort rather than the commercial value the commercial value of the technology itself. So rather than the effort of the people involved working from the industry perspective.
Great, thank you. I've now got another general question, but I think it's maybe more focused towards Jörg and Paula. And could we elaborate on the point on the inclusion of several private partners in a clinical trial? So while the data linked to the treatment provided by a private industry will be under IP, so I suppose the question there is, if you have a clinical trial undertaken by one partner, by one company, but you have 10 companies in the project, how is the IP managed? And their point is IHI by definition is a pre-competitive program.
Well, I can try to give an answer. The one is that it's the easiest way to do it would be what we've tried to do with a federated analysis. So you don't really put the data as an in-kind. You keep the data where it sits nicely in a company, but you use it within the project as a validation tool. And that would mean no one gets access to your proprietary data, sensitive data, but you ask the question. The general consortium question is asked on a private server to a private data set, and the answer is shared. That's the easiest way. There's no IP issue at all. You just say, okay, what you told me to write down 5 letters. I wrote down 5 letters in my database. I get the same result as you, which does the validation in a way. The second way, what we in industry quite often do is we have trouble sharing treatment outcome data because that's really, really sensitive. So what we provide in 3TR, the trials are standard of care driven. So no one decides which treatment the patient gets. It's up to the clinicians to decide. And if you take the SLE arm, there are, I think, 7 or 8, 9 treatments in there. It's less straightforward to analyze because the mode of actions are very different, and you need a larger data set to get a sound result out of it. But but that's the first thing. So there's no IP involved when you talk about when you talk about standard of care. And if you go for registry trials or exploratory things, there it's up to the company to decide whether they want to share the data or not. Because if you put this data as an in-kind contribution, you're going to share the outcome with everybody. It's up to you to decide. And I can only speak from my experience. Most of the pharma companies don't want to share outcome data of experimental drugs with their competitors, which seems right normal. So they are simply not part of the in-kind.
Yeah. I don't know if Bert, do you want to come in?
Yeah, if I may, I have to add maybe we're doing this prevention trial with vedolizumab versus placebo. That is not a registered indication for this drug, for vedolizumab. But first of all, the trial is not large enough for registration. But second, Takeda assured us they would not seek an indication for this indication preclinical, because they're coming to the end of their life cycle. And so that was a reassurance. Had they wanted to take it further, of course, then there was a big IP issue. That's correct.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody else would want to come in, because you're running clinical studies of different types. And I suppose a general comment here is that this is all part and parcel of the consortium agreement and also the grant agreement to make sure that the issues about data access, IP rights, that these are all agreed before the project starts and everybody has clarity and transparency around this so that we avoid unfortunate surprises whenever the work begins. I don't know, Scott, did you unmuted yourself
Yeah,
to come in?
I was just going to say, this is one angle of this as well, is you could have clinical trial data, but then only take, for example, the control samples,
Yeah.
or use the samples for a different outcome, or use some of the data in a different way. Like, what's the population look like? For example, that may not be, although I still find even proposing that can be very challenging because the people have a very protective stance within the company, getting to understand it's only going to be used this aspect. But by IP wise, that should be fine. But I do think this federated approach that Jörg mentioned, I've used that in severe asthma registries, is really, it has a lot of potential there to solve a lot of these problems.
Okay, and an interesting question coming up now, and I think, Lutz, we should start with you because you have a lot of experience with JDRF, Breakthrough Type 1 Diabetes, Hemsley, and the question is, I wonder how the contribution of philanthropy was handled.
Well, in our case, indeed, we have a lot of contribution from both Helmsley and Breakthrough, who are both in the US. Helmsley, all of it is financial contribution, so it's cash contribution. It is from the side of the industry part, so it is matched with EU money, but it is cash contribution. So it's spent in Europe, so it's not seen as non-EU, and it's all matched by cash EU money. Bit similar for Breakthrough, although their part of their contribution is in-kind contribution because they have quite some FTEs, but it's never been more than 20% overall non-EU. And they also have some partners, some people working in Europe. So that is part of their in-kind contribution, but also a large part there is financial contribution.
Yeah, I asked the question because we had the same issue with Helmsley. Helmsley sponsors project in Crohn's disease and in type 1 diabetes. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. And they were running research work in North America that they sponsored. And we were thinking maybe sponsoring that money for the research results that we could bring in could count for in kind, but it didn't. So
they didn't.
It was not. It didn't work out according to the rules. But so had they given us cash, then apparently it's possible. Yes. But philanthropy is a specific situation that we had a hard time with.
And just again, another general observation from the office's side. We like philanthropic organizations because they often are working in an overlapping way in an overlapping space. But it's just to remind everybody that the same rules apply to them as apply to everybody else. So whether it's cash, whether it's in kind, they're bound by the same obligations if they sign the grant agreement. I'm very conscious of time because we're drawing to the end. And then we have one general question, which is about, so one of the main limitations in being able to apply to an IHI call is finding private partners. So what is your advice in being able to identify substantial in kind for submitting a proposal to IHI? So maybe that's for you, Geert, and for Lutz.
I can start up front. You need to have your network in place. If you need to build your network for the sake of of this proposal, you will be too late.
Okay.
So this is a work of years, sometimes decades, to know people in the right companies. And when you're experienced, you have that, and then it works out. But as an unknown researcher in a certain field approaching companies that you don't know the internal workarounds, I think it has little chance of success. But at least has been my experience, but interested in others' opinion.
Yeah, I have exactly the same opinion. I mean, we started way before the call came out, and we had our network halfly built already. And even then, for the private partners, it was still very stressful because indeed, I mean, how long does it take before they decide how much? I mean, from the start, they say, yes, we're interested, but to decide for them how much will they put in, I mean, we had to start writing the project before knowing, will we get 5 million, will we get 10 million? It's a risk you need to take. And in the end, I mean, hopefully it turns out, but it's if it's a one-stage call, it's not really easy.
Thanks, Ruth. I think Paula, did you want to come in?
Yes, also, I mean, from an industry also perspective, thank you also to IHI for these also webinars in which they are explaining about the financial structure, because this is also something crucial that all the industries need to understand in order to be able to participate in these projects.
I would have a quick comment on this.
Yeah, sure.
Just when we have the honor to be in quite a couple of projects being the leading industry, so we're also trying to organize our industry partners and peers in order to make sure that we get the in kind that is needed so that the project itself that has been designed can be run. And I can tell you this is hard work. And as we all know, everybody waits to the last minute, so it's always stressful. But if the project itself has enough traction within the companies, you're going to get there. So it's really about getting used to being stressed and last minute ditches and everything. But it's always complicated to build a budget for a stage 1 call as for a stage 2 call. It's always the same. It's quite easy in a way to develop a project, but then to get everything together, make all the ends meet and put it together, get everybody agreed on it, that's the hard part. Dreaming up a project is probably, it's the first step, it's necessary, but then there's a lot of hard work afterwards.
And Scott, maybe?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I would just add that to reflect what Jörg said as well, it takes a lot of interaction and a lot of explaining and re-explaining what in-kind is and what it can be. Because even when it's a difficult concept, I think people have to understand what they can bring in as in-kind and what it'll mean. So that's been our experience, I think, working with Sheraton and Intercept and other projects. It just takes a lot of meeting and interaction. And then start to get at that point where they understand, you understand what they can bring. And then really, like I said before, co-design, be really open to change your project, even though, so it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. So sometimes you have to put the chicken out, get the egg. So, that's the idea.
Okay, well, thanks, Scott. You've the last word. I have to apologize to everybody who submitted questions, but we received an awful lot of questions. For those of you that were interested in technical detail, again, I direct you towards our website where we have a really detailed webinar focused on in-kind contributions and the financial rules. And if you still have questions after you've watched that, don't hesitate to reach out and ask us your question. And you can do that through the info desk at IHI. So time is against us. So maybe I can move to the next slide and we can draw everything to a close. So I think we've heard today about the leverage that bringing in-kind contributions can bring to research projects and how we can advance them beyond what might be a relatively small scale. For me, some of the key elements that we always have to remember is that companies are generally financing their participation in the project through their in-kind contributions. And this actually makes our platform and our program quite different from other public-private partnerships around the world. where companies are involved, but they're giving cash and then sitting on a board. Actually, in an IHI project and an IMI before it, the companies are full project partners working with the publicly funded partners. They sign the grant agreement and they are bound by the rights and obligations. And therefore, it is a true public-private collaboration. We've also heard as well that through the in-kind contributions that companies are bringing, we're often seeing resources, whether that be samples or clinical studies, that are not available elsewhere to other publicly funded researchers. And I think as well, with the exciting results that we've seen come out of IMI, and we expect to see come out of our IHI projects, that many of the results that our projects generated would not have been possible without the access to the resource that the companies are bringing in. And next slide. And my final slide is taken from our annual activity report that we will publish later this year. And we analyze the in-kind contributions and we report on it every year. So at the end of December 2025, the in-kind contributions to operational activities committed to IHI, over 50%, 54% were actually personnel costs. And for me, this shows the difference between IHI and other programs, because we are collaborating at the personal level. Researchers from a public background are collaborating with researchers from an industry background, bringing the knowledge, the expertise, the passion they have for their work and for their areas of expertise. And that's the foundation of a true public-private partnership. And that's the foundation upon which we will overcome the challenges that are preventing innovations from reaching patients. So it just leaves me the floor to thank you for your attention today, for attending this really interesting webinar. I really want to thank all of the speakers because, as always, when I get to talk to our projects and hear about the fantastic work you're doing, it's always interesting and I'm always learning. And so thanks for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. And a quick word of thanks to the communication team at IHI who organized everything today. They're sitting in the background, they're keeping me under control, and you don't see them. So thanks to Nasima and Iris for all their hard work, because the webinar wouldn't have been possible without them. So with that, thanks all. I draw the webinar to a close and I wish you a very good afternoon.